Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from the USA Today NFL Wire. And on the line with me on the recording on a Tuesday night is Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from SB Nation. He is also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast, co-host with Justin Higdon, who was on our show just a few episodes ago, and we hope can be back again as we will be talking about the Combine, but the Combine is not this week. This is our free agent preview, as episode 349, and we're going to talk free agency, but before we talk free agency, what a day this Tuesday, as there was news galore. Before we hit the free agency stuff with the Cardinals, we can't delay talking about the Seattle Seahawks trading Russell Wilson to the Denver Broncos. And this coming, hours, maybe 2 hours after the news. It was maybe an hour and a half, not even 2 hours after news broke that Aaron Rodgers had agreed to a 4-year deal to return to the Green Bay Packers. What a day. Now, Rodgers back to Green Bay was not a surprise, but the Seahawks pulled the trigger. Russell Wilson, they traded Russell Wilson. They got a package of 5 draft picks and 3 players, for a first this year and next year, a couple of seconds, and a 5th-round pick. And they got Drew Lock, their quarterback from Denver, Shelby Harris, defensive lineman, and tight end Noah Fant. First of all, what were you shocked that it happened so fast? And 2, what was your initial reaction when the news came down?
I wasn't shocked that it happened so fast. We've been hearing rumors that this was going to happen. I was just, I guess shocked that it happened so fast after Aaron Rodgers kind of agreed to extend his contract with the Green Bay Packers, but hasn't formally signed yet. Is that the best way to put it?
Yeah, they agreed to terms, and it's funny because Aaron Rodgers loves to mince words. Loves it. The reporters out there saying he signed. No, actually, the big reporters, the national guys, Ian Rappaport, Adam Schefter, didn't say he signed. They said he agreed to terms on a 4-year, $200 million deal. I'm like, he didn't sign it. We know you're not in Green Bay. It's fine. But you're gonna sign that deal. You agreed to it.
Yeah, and so that's he's gonna sign the richest contract in NFL history. And so Denver, who had been in on Rodgers and basically had been putting everything on Rodgers, is now waiting, is now moving on. And Ben Albright on Twitter talked about it a little bit today. And he said that the Broncos at the Senior Bowl basically started to pivot to Russell Wilson as well, not shutting the door on Rodgers, but knowing that it could not happen, and then they started to look into what it would take to get Russell Wilson. And I guess it's just shocking only in the sense because Pete Carroll's still there. I thought for sure that a 70-year-old Pete Carroll would retire before he ended up not coaching Russell Wilson, and apparently now Bobby Wagner, who reports on Tuesday night, same day that they moved on from their offensive leader for the last decade, They're moving on from their defensive leader from the last decade, and allegedly releasing Bobby Wagner. And there's rumors that they're shopping Tyler Lockett. So this is a 100% full blown rebuild, and I'm shocked that the 70-year-old Carroll is involved in that.
It's baffling. It's baffling, and
so I think that would be the only reason that I'm surprised, right?
Right? Yeah, I mean, we kind of expected this to happen. In fact, if we were talking a year ago, we felt that Russell Wilson was going to get traded. Honestly, that they were going to play it out last season, and that he would get traded this offseason. The fun part is, the Cardinals are going to still see Russell Wilson, because they travel to Denver this coming season, and so they will get to see Russ at least one more time. That AFC, I will say this, the AFC, I think just passed the NFC West. The AFC West just passed the NFC West in terms of perhaps the best division in football, when you've got the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes, the Chargers with Justin Herbert. Now you've got Denver with Russell Wilson. And they were, honestly, that Denver's team in terms of their talent was a quarterback away. They could be, that AFC is going to be, their AFC is loaded. The AFC is absolutely loaded. And the poor Raiders, who were a playoff team, the poor Raiders are like, wait, what about us?
Yeah, and you kind of do feel bad for these guys in Las Vegas, because man, they made the playoffs. They were really close to beating Cincinnati, and now it's basically looked at as that they're the worst team in the AFC West. And last year, I mean, they beat Kansas City. They held off Los Angeles, the Chargers, and Denver is going kind of all in to get Russell Wilson and hope that he's the guy that puts him over the top. And everybody in the meantime is like, oh well, the Raiders, they're the worst team in it. It's kind of, I mean, honestly, it's kind of similar to what happened with the Arizona Cardinals last year, right? Like, you had the Cardinals as the fringe playoff contender. The 49ers went and got Trey Lance. The Rams went and got Matthew Stafford. The Seahawks, retained Russell Wilson, and everybody's like, well, the Cardinals are still the worst team in the NFC West. And so sometimes it just takes the actual season. But yeah, I mean, you do feel bad for those poor Raiders, right? Like, all they did was improve and get through a really tough season with the firing of their head coach after just a handful of games. And instead you end up with now all of a sudden it's this huge hill they have to climb, basically.
And I mean, but what are you going to do? Like, if you're going to be the best, you got to beat the best. And so it stinks. But if they're really going to be good, that's the sort of thing that they need to do, like the Cardinals did this year. It does change kind of the landscape of the NFC completely, because you've got Aaron Rodgers, you got Dak Prescott, and then you look at the quarterbacks across the rest of the NFC, and you're like, it might be Kyler Murray, might it? Who's next, right? When you talk about that group, like if you're looking at the NFC quarterbacks, you've got the guys that are proven. You got Aaron Rodgers, you got Dak Prescott, and then you're like, Matthew Stafford. Okay, it's Matthew Stafford still. And then you got Kyler. And then you really feel like right now that the Cardinals are still in a really good position to compete for the playoffs, because you keep moving talent across the conference to the other conference, and no matter how things ended last year, it just feels like the NFC is still wide open.
Yeah, and that's kind of where they're at, right? You have to look at it as one of the things the Cardinals can do if they choose to retain, or extend Kyler Murray, is that they can really be the team that's steady.
They can be the kind of the now and later team because the Seahawks are rebuilding. 49ers, like if Trey Lance turns out okay, then they're in the same boat. But you know that the Rams are not going to be the Rams for long. And the way they've got their cap structured, the Matthew Stafford thing, it's like you get things locked up here with the Cardinals. You're the stable team. You're the promising team of the NFC West.
Yeah, so you just wonder how it's going to pan out here because they've got so many questions still to answer. But they're in a good spot. They've got a really good, chance to continue to build on what they've started. And now with the move of Russell Wilson and like we said, the addition or subtraction of Bobby Wagner, man, there's a real chance that over the next 3 years, the Cardinals are the best team in the NFC West. Now the problem becomes, is that what's going to happen, or is this going to be one of those situations where it becomes an issue?
Totally. And didn't want to spend that much time on Russell Wilson and everything because the truth is, this is our free agency preview show. And so over the last several weeks, we talked about the Cardinals' own free agents. We started things talking about what were the needs at each position. So we kind of looked at this offseason, where did they need to address, in like what types of roles of players that they need to address this offseason at each position. We looked at cost-cutting moves that the Cardinals could do to save some cap space, which they're going to need to do, frankly, with the cap situation. And we went over each of the free agents on their own team, whom we think they should bring back or not. And now we will actually look at the entire free agency. We're going to focus on each of the main position areas of need and kind of talk about maybe big ticket guys like the Cardinals, the guys, whether we think that they will bring one of the players back, maybe higher profile names in free agency at those positions, and as well some lower key guys to look out for that we think fit what the Cardinals do. So coming on next on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web, we will look at specifically at backup quarterback and the options at running back. What could the Cardinals do there? That's coming next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. We're going to talk about two positions first. We know Kyler Murray, drama aside, we will run with the assumption that Kyler Murray will be the starting quarterback moving forward. And honestly, I think the contract extension will happen, whether it's in March or April or July or August. It'll get done. They extended the coach and GM. That's going to happen. So there we go. But at backup quarterback, we've got Colt McCoy, who is going to be a free agent. Let's kind of talk about that. Do you think Colt is the guy ultimately they bring back? Does he want to come back, and will they bring him back?
Yeah, I would assume he's in their plans. I would assume. I hope he does, because I think he's proven that he is a good game manager that can get them through a game or a stretch of games if needed. And so for that reason, I hope he's back.
I think that's ultimately what they will end up doing. And the terms of the type of backup that the Cardinals really kind of want for Kyler is someone that can sort of, and Steve Keim said this, I believe it was at the Combine, and it was perhaps kind of confirming some of the things that were said about Kyler, that he could use someone to help about being a pro and studying film, and Colt really is good about that. Other names on the list that I think qualify, but are highly less likely. I mean, a guy like Blaine Gabbert would also fit that bill. I think he's guaranteed to be back with the Buccaneers, because why would he ruin a a good thing? People like to make fun of Andy Dalton, and he's still a fringe guy that you can have start, but I think he also fits that mold. Tyrod Taylor as well, but honestly, the truth is, I don't know if there is a better option as a guy who can come in and play at a starter level and be the sort of rock that Kyler that might need as the backup and help for Cliff Kingsbury than Colt McCoy. Honestly, he's kind of the perfect fit.
Right, and I think that's kind of the best way to describe it. He's the perfect fit for this team. He's the perfect fit to be the backup and kind of the veteran in the room, because much to the chagrin of a large section of this fan base, one of the things Kyler is not is a guy that's, a vocal leader. And Colt has enough cachet and respect in the room, in the league, to be vocal.
Who could be a voice to Kyler's example, and sort of that.
Right, exactly. And he's a guy that can be a leader and, things of that nature.
Running back, that's a really interesting position, because, they'd really, Cliff Kingsbury would love to bring back both players, both James Conner and Chase Edmonds. We've sort of discussed this before. I would think if I were to prioritize one or the other, I think I would do James Conner. But don't you think that of the two, don't you think that Conner's the more likely one to get a more lucrative deal elsewhere?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think some of the big issues you've got going into this season or into this free agency is obviously the cap space. But when you look at a guy like Conner, that's, I would say, realistically who they'd like back. But at the same time, they have to be smart about their situation. And so, a guy like Conner is probably, and I'm just pulling it up right here, I think he's projected to get about
$6 million. It was on Spot Track. It was 2 years, 12 million, basically 11.9 million.
Yeah. So I mean, when you look at it, would you really? I mean, yes, you'd love to have him back. I don't think either of us would disagree with that. But at that market value, if that's what he gets, around 12 million, that it's probably going to be heavily backloaded. And so you're looking at probably, I would guess, 3 this year and 9 next year, or maybe 4 and 8, right? When you talk about cap hit type of thing. And we know how the Cardinals do it. So if they gave him a 2-year, $12 million deal, it'd probably be, $3 million in cap hit this year, $4 million next year, and then some $5
and then some dead money on the back end.
$5 million on the back end of dead money. That's I mean, like it or not, that's typically how they do it. And so, when you look at it from that instance, yeah, I would love that, but they've got to be smart about it and where they go. The question is, is there somebody else in free agency? And
especially for the type, so if you want to go with someone bigger who can do the short yardage things, what they really liked about them, you could lean. Jonathan Ward. He could fill that role potentially, but here's a name, and his he might get more. He probably is going to get more attention than than we initially, and that's Sony Michel. I think he's a really good fit because he did the same thing for the Rams last year. Like if they were able to re-sign Chase Edmonds, because there are some analytics. If you follow Kyle Odegaard, used to be with the Cardinals and now writes for Compare.bet, but he's really heavy in the analytics, and you look at some of the playmaking ability that Edmonds has. If you have Chase Edmonds or a like player, I think Sony Michel gives you that strong inside running type thing that Connor did as well. You know, he's 27 years old. He got paid $2.5 million almost last year. It's going to be interesting. Let me take a look at what the market value for Michel comes out to, and it comes out to $5 million. So it's a little less than Connor. So you could get kind of the same type of role for a little less cheddar. I wouldn't mind him.
What about a Melvin Gordon who's still young at running back wise, 29, and is projected about $5.5 million?
Yeah, that's another good one. That is, especially because he has and he has the size and he has a pedigree, so he has he could be the guy.
Yeah, and he's had strong. I think he's averaged 10 touchdowns a season the last 3 years.
Yeah, he's gone so backwards from this last 8, 9, 8, 10, 8, 10. So
yeah, and I think that's just rushing, right?
Yeah, that's just rushing. And then he added so he's gotten. So if we look at career, he's got 14 receiving touchdowns, 50. So he's got 67 rushing. He's got 67 total touchdowns in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seasons, and one of those seasons he didn't score. So he's averaging over 10 touchdowns a year over the last 6 seasons. So he's going to be productive in the red zone. Yeah, Melvin Gordon's interesting. I like Sony Michel as well. But what? So here's a player. I know he hasn't done anything except the end of last season, but the upside, if you can stay healthy, Rashad Penny would be a low-key... I think what Rashad Penny could be is your James Conner-like signing.
I saw somebody compare, obviously not stylistically, but compare him, Penny, to Thomas Jones. And so for longtime Cardinals fans, Jess and I, we remember Thomas Jones all too well, right?
Yes.
First round running back that they had to have. They needed that alpha running back, and he just flopped in Arizona, and then he went elsewhere and became
almost got ran out of Chicago and then emerged.
Yeah, and so to that point, if you get, and obviously Penny had that incredible end to the season. And so when you watch it, do you bring him on? I would wonder how much money it would cost. Because like you said, would anybody give him a 2-year deal?
Yeah, that's the thing. I could see Rashad Penny being a James Conner type deal where you get him a year for $2 million. Former first-round pick. If you guys have been following the show, the two of us actually absolutely loved Rashad Penny coming out of college when he played for San Diego State. Then if you watched,
now we were a little shocked in the first round,
but we loved we were worried about him going to Seattle.
Yeah.
That didn't end up happening, but I kind of like him. But that's also. But I don't want I want him as the other back and still kind of going with that role. Obviously, if you get a guy like Melvin Gordon, you can probably let both Connor and Edmonds go and then bring in someone, either let Eno Benjamin kind of develop into that role or bring in another type of running back, a complementary back without the same upside as Edmonds.
What about I know we'll get to it, but I feel like if you brought in if you brought in, let's say, a Melvin Gordon, or I'll throw another name, a Leonard Fournette. Fournette's, looked at as being a guy that's going to get around $6 million. So again, right around the same, type of money we're talking with James Conner. So you bring him in for three, and let's just up it a little bit, say 320, obviously, a little more, but three years, 20 million. That gets him to his year 30. Probably same thing where you're talking about maybe backloading that contract a little bit. Would your focus then be on, a guy like Alex Collins, maybe, like a journeyman?
Yes.
But guy spot starter, or would you rather look at acquiring a guy in like the 4th or 5th round, like a Rashad White type of guy?
Well, I don't see why you don't do both, to be honest.
Okay.
I don't count on Eno Benjamin. And if you have a running back that comes up, well, great. Then you've got someone to. But I would look, so guys that I wouldn't mind adding, like if it ends up being both Connor and Edmonds who leave. Players who sort of intrigue me a little bit would be a guy like Jeff Wilson, who played for the 49ers and one of their running backs that was great, in a limited type of thing. Little guys like that. Alex Collins is a guy kind of looked at as well. I do think, well, Jonathan Ward is an inevitability. He's an exclusive rights free agent. He will be back. But you're looking at kind of guys that fit that mold. Matt Breed, it's been too long since he did anything, but a Gio Bernard would also kind of fit that role. He's older now. He's hit at 30. But someone of that ilk who can do some of the things in the passing game as well would be kind of fun to see, because we know that Cliff Kingsbury really does like to have at least two backs. At least at the pro level, he's learned he needs to have two backs that he can rely on.
Let me throw two more kind of low end names out there, and by low end we mean guys that'll be in the that less than probably $2 million range. Jalen Richard and the other guy from San Francisco, Jeff Wilson.
Yeah, I mentioned Wilson as well. Richard, yeah, those are all, and those. That's the thing, is once you get that, when you have that.
Oh, sorry, I meant Raheem Mostert.
Oh, Raheem Mostert. Okay, Raheem Mostert. Yeah, and Mostert's a little bit bigger, isn't he?
And he's a guy that San Francisco has gotten a lot out of. But again, you're talking about injuries. So if you bring in a guy like the guy, or you retain James Conner, I feel like all those guys are viable secondary type runners.
The one thing about Mostert that's much less appealing is he offers very little with the passing game.
Yeah, you're correct on that. But I mean, we've seen that Cliff is that he's not afraid to kind of make it obvious what he's going to do, right? You get what I'm saying? Like when he brought in James Conner originally, like he wasn't
like, we're going to run the ball,
right? And so that's what you wonder if a guy like that would fit. And you're right, absolutely. Like, it's not a strong part of his game, but when you look at it from the perspective of what they need, maybe as the primary backup, using that term loosely, but primary backup, maybe he's the type of guy that that could make sense.
Absolutely. All names to kind of look forward to. Coming next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's come back and talk about a couple positions. The rest of the offense. We'll talk receiver, tight end, and maybe a little bit at guard. That's coming next at Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Seahawks podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. The wide receiver position is one of the areas where they will get the most discussion out of the Cardinals fans. One, because it appears that they're going to have to completely revamp their receiving room. As AJ Green, I think Cliff wouldn't mind having him back, but I don't know if he's going to be a priority. And kind of interesting is the fact that the type of deal that he's projected to get, like his projected market value is way higher than I would have ever guessed. Though granted, he had over 800 yards. So honestly, it's not much more than he made last year. Like he had a base, I think, of $6 million, and I think he ended up getting about $8 million after incentives. But a 4-year, $28 million deal for a guy his age, I'm like, he's 33 years. He's going to be 34 this year. And do you think someone's going to give him a 4-year deal?
Well, and let me ask you this. So we're recording Tuesday, March 8th. And it was announced today that, and this got lost in the entireness of today. It was announced that the Los Angeles Chargers paid wide receiver Mike Williams
$20
million a year. 4-year, it was $360 or $480?
$360, I think.
$360. And I think it was 40 guaranteed. Maybe that's where I got the 4 from.
That's crazy. But come on, receivers are going crazy.
So that's the thing is, are fans ready for that? So there's one name that I've kind of like superstarred in this whole situation, and he's the guy I would pony up for. And when I say pony up, I mean he's a guy that I think you could go get at a good mark, and I think he would absolutely knock out of the park what this team needs. And that's and he's a young guy as well, and that's DJ Chark.
Yes.
Coming off of
because he's got the speed and the length.
Yep, and he's coming off a major injury. But you look at it as a second-year player in Jacksonville, he had 73 receptions for over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. Even in 2020, playing for that Jags team that basically had Jess and I at quarterback, he still had similar production to what we saw from AJ Green, 53 receptions, just 706 yards. So, not quite the 800-plus yards that Green had, but he had 5 touchdowns still. Remember, that Jags team averaged 19 points a game. So 5 touchdowns was a small miracle for that team. I'm going to look right now. Their touchdown leader was James Robinson, who had 10 total touchdowns. And then everybody else basically on the roster had 5 or less. So, I think he's a guy that can play, man. Obviously, the medical check is the big thing for him, but here's the kicker. He's projected, and obviously this is market value, and we'll see what it really ends up as, but he is projected by Spot Track to get almost the same amount of money as Christian Kirk. And he plays, obviously, a completely different role, and he would answer the question to the problem the Cardinals have with that big X receiver, or the big Z receiver in this offense.
Well, and what I like about him is not only the length, but the guy can run, and so he kind of gives you both options with that, because he's got some speed. He's like, when he came in the league, that's what he was known. He's a burner, and you've got length to boot, and which makes a really nice complement to DeAndre Hopkins on the other side, and it presumably is going to be Rondale Moore on the inside, and so you've got the greatness over here of DeAndre Hopkins, who kind of does everything. You add length and speed on the outside with Chark, and Rondale Moore on the inside, who has embarrassing like embarrassing elusiveness and speed. Like, we have to remember what happened to that. Almost every single time he touched the ball early in the season, he embarrassed somebody. And I think we're going to see him get back to that this next season. And so and then if you add on top of that, even if so, Antoine Wesley is your fourth receiver, or if they go tight end, and if they don't do as nearly as much 10 personnel, you got Wesley as this backup who can play X and Z, and he's an okay, but he's nothing more than your fourth receiver. Another guy that I think low-key is also would be a nice fit. Doesn't give you quite the length, but I think would be very good as a number 2. And he's still young at 25 years old, is Juju Smith-Schuster. I think he would be a very, very productive player in this system, playing opposite Hopkins, kind of like the role that he had when Antonio Brown was still there. And he did, like, when he became the guy, he wasn't nearly the guy that he should have been. But I think he makes a nice fit. He's not super long. He can move. He's 6'1", but he can play outside. And that, I think that also gives you a nice fit there as well. A player that I would love as well, but he's apparently one of the priorities of the Cowboys. I think Cedric Wilson would be really, really good in that role as well. But with the reports that Amari Cooper is probably going to be cut,
out.
Cedric Wilson becomes that guy. Though let's say this: would you try and go get an Amari Cooper or say an Allen Robinson? Depending on how that goes, I kind of proposed it when Alex Sutton, he wrote a piece for Cards Wire for me, and the deal that I kind of structured it as was a 3-year, $45 million deal where he would get $20 million in cash this year, but he would only have an $8 million cap hit. He still gets the $20 million he was going to get this year, although the next 2 years go down a little bit. But I mean, if you're trying to kind of go in all in this year, if you can't get it, or if Chark's medicals don't check out, wouldn't it be really fun to have Hopkins and Cooper?
Yeah, Amari would be a great addition. I think, and like you said, he would fit what they need. I think, a guy like Cooper would be big, but, they've got to make a couple decisions. And another guy, you mentioned Cedric Wilson. I think that, he makes sense. He's kind of the odd man out in that group, right? And unless, like you said, they trade Amari Cooper. But the other guy that could be the odd man out is Michael Gallup.
Yeah.
So, you've got
Gallup's coming off that. He got hurt at late, which will make his value. But it sounds like that the Cowboys are trying to lock him up.
Right, and so that's the thing. And so you look at all of these guys, and they're going to have to either move on from Amari Cooper or depending on what they want to do. But all of these guys give you good size at 6'1" to 6'2". Another interesting name that I was going to bring up that was a little bit on the lower end, kind of in that AJ Green region in terms of contract, was Marquez Valdez-Scantling from the Green Bay Packers, because we know that he kind of already did the same type of thing for the Packers, right? Like, he was basically a deep threat, and you look at his career. They're projecting him right around like 3 years, $26 million. I don't think I'd have an issue with that. Would you?
No. And you're getting. It's not exciting, but those are the type of deals kind of that you need, and offers the kind of the skill set.
Right.
I'm looking down this list. Honestly, if you're looking for a stop, I'd still go I still wouldn't mind Emmanuel Sanders at age 35.
Yeah, right.
That's as crazy as it is. He continues to be productive. Honestly, my only issue with AJ Green is the sometimes aloofness, and I think that was hard for someone like Kyler Murray. It was hard to watch that, but production wise, he had a good year. My pipe dream was my son's was Odell Beckham with the torn ACL in the Super Bowl. That's not going to happen. And it looks like they're going to try and get him back on the Rams. Other than that, then you're just kind of, there's just guys out there. Like there's players out there here like Jakeem Grant. But he's more of a returner. Zach Pascal is an interesting one that hasn't, in terms of the production that's out there, you're going to be getting someone who you hope improves. Yeah. And so there's going to be some projection involved. As opposed to someone like AJ Green last year who, he was bouncing back, but you'd seen high-end production. But you looking up and down the list of these players, and you're projecting that they can be better than they were.
What about a guy, taking a flyer on a guy Will Fuller?
If he's, I'd want someone else behind him.
Yeah, and I get that. That's the hard part, is because he's just been banged up for so long. But man, he's been when he's on, he's a guy
getting that Texans team back together. J.J. Watt with DeAndre Hopkins and Will Fuller.
And just think about what he would be able to do to take the top off a defense, right?
Oh, jeez. But if he's healthy, both him and Moore on the field at the same time, that's a lot of speed to cover.
Yeah. You look at, I was going to mention, dude, Sammy Watkins is still not even 30. That's baffling to me.
Sammy Watkins feels like he's been in the league forever and that he's been hurt.
Forever. Yeah. But, you look at it, I'm trying to look, nobody else. We talked about a couple guys in terms of that high end, Allen Robinson obviously would be a great fit. I just don't see them having the money. They're talking, 16 to 18 million a year for him. I'm not opposed to it. Don't get me wrong, but I just don't see them shelling out that much. I think, if you look at it from a perspective of high, medium, low, Allen Robinson's obviously your high end guy. I would say that duo of a Chark or a Cedric Wilson would be your medium guy, right?
Yeah,
and
totally.
And probably Juju Smith-Schuster. You're probably right between that $8 to $13 million range in there.
Almost kind of what Christian Kirk's going to get on the market, but not Christian Kirk, right?
Well, and a guy that is, you don't want to say strictly, but a guy that is more of that Z.
Right, absolutely. And that is the main thing with Christian Kirk, is that he can play it, but he's much better in the slot. And if you've already got a guy that you really want to develop in the slot, so unless you project Rondale Moore to be your Z,
right,
then Christian Kirk, if they see that in Moore, cool. Bring back Christian Kirk. I'm all about that life. Christian Kirk in the slot, he's fantastic. But yeah, we think that Moore will be sprinkled in on the outside probably.
Right. And so that's, I think those are your scenarios where you look at, and then you got, kind of your, like we said, low end guys, like a Will Fuller or a Deshaun Jackson, right? You bring in veteran speed, guys that, or injury guys that need to be, that'll come in on a 1 year prove it type of deal. So I think that's what you look at for the wide receiver class, so to speak, because that's the other thing we have to remember, is that the depth and strength of this draft might be in the wide receivers on day 2.
Yeah. At tight end, obviously they've got two notable players on their own team in Zachertz and Max Williams, and I think the preference would be for one or both to be back. I think numbers-wise, if we're looking at what's projected, it's going to be one or the other. And while Max Williams might be the more complete player, it's hard to bring him back knowing the history that he has with durability, and especially the production that Zachertz had in 11 games and the rapport that he has with Kyler Murray. I think priority number one at that position is going to be Ertz, and I think ultimately he will be the player that comes back, because if they didn't plan on him re-signing, it would have been weird for them to trade for him in the first place, in my opinion. But barring that, I don't see them going after Rob Gronkowski. But a guy like C.J. Uzomah, who had played for Cincinnati this last year, is intriguing. Gerald Everett's a free agent again. Jared Cook, in all his age, is still out there.
What would you think about like a Robert Tonyan? Now he's projected a little bit higher at like 8 to 10 million,
and he's coming off an ACL. That's the one thing, because he tore his ACL against the Cardinals in midseason.
Yeah. And then you've got like an OJ Howard, who has never really lived up to the hype. Dude, by the way, we didn't even mention it but I was shocked to see the Browns franchise tag David Njoku.
Right. Like, that's
so that like kind of
and so yeah.
Market,
well,
right?
and there were a few tight ends that got tagged. Mike Gesicki in Miami was another one, but that was sort of expected. But yeah, you've got some names out there. I think Zach Ertz becomes priority number one, Max Williams 2, and then after that there's options. But and I think with what you want is then to go maybe Max Williams kind of expectations like, and then kind of specialize between the all-around and blocking type guys. OJ Howard would be an interesting one, because we know but in fact OJ Howard and both Gerald Everett would be very intriguing to me, both of them.
Well, like, I think you could bring in a Max Williams and an OJ Howard, right?
Yeah,
or you could
probably.
You could probably bring in a Zach Ertz and an OJ Howard. Heck, I mean, but when you look at it, like you said, a couple of things stand out. One, these like higher end tight ends are old.
Yeah, Ertz is 31, Gronkowski's 32, Jared Cook is going to be 35. So you're getting the very back end, and
even like a CJ Uzomah is going to be
he's going to be 30 this year.
Yeah, I mean, Eric Ebron's going to be 29 this year. Like, Hayden Hurst is going to be 29 this year. So Max Williams is going to be 28, but he has the body of a 42-year-old. Even Robert Tonyan is going to be 28, right?
Yeah, he is.
So it's just kind of crazy to think that there's, maybe a guy like OJ Howard is your best bet, right? A 27-year-old, get him on a 1 year, $2 to $3 million type of deal, and then bring back Ertz for a year as well.
Yep. And on top of that, because what we talked about is that they need all the tight ends. You could still draft a guy. There's right, some good. There's some real specialists. Like, if you remember listening to the show, is that this is a good tight end class for specialization.
Right, and so you can get an all-around guy like a Trey McBride in round 2, or a Jeremy Rucker in round 3, or you go to round 4, or I guess they don't have a 4th round pick, but you go to day 3, and there are some guys that just fit what they need, and so all of that, I think, makes a huge difference. But you need, like Jess said, all of the tight ends. So where are you going with it? How are you doing it? And how are you getting it there? And that's, that's what matters. And they need to probably sign 2 and draft 1. So,
yeah, it makes that we go to guard. The guard is an interesting one because we feel that both tackle positions are solid and the center position is set. We just don't know what exactly the plan is at guard because we feel they're probably going to cut Justin Pugh, which means we think that they're going to try and significantly upgrade or try to bring in someone at one of the 2 positions, while the other there might be competition because I think they like Justin Murray enough, and I think they're kind of counting on Josh Jones to be better this year. And so if they end up cutting Pugh, I think the left guard spot is going to be the one where it's either going to be Pugh or they're going to try and upgrade. And then the right guard position will be sort of the who plays out where they bring in, it'll be a battle between Murray and Jones, and maybe they bring in a fringe or older type starter who's been a starter but might not be a starter anymore. Kind of like the Brian Winters move last year was kind of the plan. They wanted him to start, but then he didn't end up starting and didn't end up on the team. What a weird thing I wish that we knew more about. But I'm getting that vibe. So if they move on from Pugh, how splashy do you think they get? Do they go for a Laken Tomlinson? Do they try and go for Brandon Scherf? Do they go with a Norwell? I know that a guy that was when he signed with the Jaguars originally, that was kind of the target that I remember we had as a potential guy that the Cardinals could get and that's when wasn't that when Pugh? Wasn't that the Pugh year?
Yeah, I believe so. And I think Pugh ended up actually being better. So
yeah.
Now I want to ask because I just want to make sure it was Ali Marpet that retired, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't know if I don't think Alex Kappa is going to hit the market. Probably not, right? Because they got to bring him back in Tampa. You would assume at this point.
Yeah, you'd figure. No, it was Marpet that retired.
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, you figure that a Kappa is going to go back, but he'd be a great fit. 27 going on 28, probably going to get a 5-year, $50 million type deal. Connor Williams is another young guy. He's the big fish in this pond. Looking at probably 12 to 14 million a year. The name I really like that I would be all on board for 4 years, 30 million type of money would be a James Daniels, right? The guard from the Chicago Bears. He's been a solid pro in the NFL. I think he's a good fit in the offense. I think he's a good fit with what they're trying to do and keeping, the cost down, but improvement up. I think he'd be a nice fit. And then what about a guy like Austin Corbett, right?
Absolutely.
From the Rams, and you strengthen your team and weaken the other team. He's at about that $9 million range. So again, you're talking about if you want to go up the ladder, to a Brandon Scherf, like you said, who's the top. He and Connor Williams are the top guys. Now, the thing with Scherf is, and people forget this, he's old. He's going to be 31 this year. So even though he's a 2015 guy and he's going to go into his 8th year, he was a redshirt senior, I believe, when he was drafted. So he's, an older guy. You mentioned Norwell, he's 30. Tomlinson's 30. These dudes are, again, we're talking about it. These guys are old.
But if you look at some of the free agent and trade acquisitions, if you look at championship teams, is that is how the largest number of their starting offensive linemen are being acquired rather than necessarily developing them.
Yep.
They acquire them because that's what their quarterback needs. Yeah, I don't, depending on what's out there, I mean, I wouldn't mind a Laken Tomlinson, Connor Williams. Connor Williams, who got a really bad rap in Dallas. Let's be honest, he had struggles, but they were magnified by the fact that people had expected that Cowboys offensive line to be great. That's what they've sort of always expected them to be great. But yeah, I kind of like Austin Corbett. If we're talking sort of guys that fit the could be this, like, be projected to be the starter, but a guy that like a Justin Murray or a Josh Jones could supplant. Quentin Spain, 30 years old, Cincinnati, been a starter there. I don't think Kyle Long would leave Kansas City. I think he likes the high-end winning possibility, but he's another guy. If we're going to Buffalo, right, he's a little bit younger, but Ike Boettger is kind of that fringe end starter. And we're used to signing guys like that. These are like the Ted Larsons of the league that end up having long careers. That's going to be interesting to see. Or, if you want some versatility, I don't know what sort of interest you'll have on but Ethan Posick, who played for the Seahawks forever. That's another guy that you could bring in as well. There's lots of different options. You just don't know how they're going to go about it. But Connor Williams would be good. Austin Corbett. I like Laken Tomlinson. Any of those guys. It comes down what ultimately are they going to do with Justin Pugh, which we're not going to know until next week, probably.
Right. But even if they like negotiate Pugh, right? They probably still need to bring in somebody. Now, it doesn't have to be as splashy, to your point, but you probably need to bring somebody in. And so, those are the situations that they find themselves in, and those are exactly the decisions they have to make. I mean, you look at it, right? Laken Tomlinson projected, $9 million a year. Okay, that's not bad. But again, he's 30. Connor Williams, we talked about James Daniels, we talked about Corbett, we talked about a little bit. Like Andrew Norwell hasn't been terrible, but he's not that big of an upgrade, right? And I think he's the same age, if not a little older. What about a guy like Trey Turner?
Wouldn't be against it. I kind of feel that what they need at guard is stable, and I think more than anything is what we've experienced with the Cardinals the last year is they need continuity or stability, whether that is, so they need somehow for their line to stay healthy, which is impossible to project as an offensive line. Because as that season wore on, as that depth was tested, and early on in the season, the depth was good, but it just, as that depth kept getting tested and playing over the course of the year, the play just degraded. And down to the end where you're like, what the frick? This offensive line used to be good.
Right, exactly. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds. But they've got some options, which is nice, right? Like that's one of the things that we talked about is that they've got choices. So, if you go into this with and you end up with cutting Pugh and signing a James Daniels, I think you're in a good spot.
Yeah. Coming up next on the Rise of Sea-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We move to the defensive side of the ball. We're going to focus on two areas. We're going to focus on the edge, outside linebacker, and cornerback. That's coming next on Rise of Sea-Red. We're back on the Rise of Sea-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. The outside linebacker position is going to be very interesting because it feels like Chandler Jones is one. They want him back, but not at the price he wants. And it feels like the Patrick Peterson situation from a year ago. And I can't remember who was saying it. Like I tried to find the quote, whether it was Cliff or Kime at the Combine, and maybe it was Michael Bidwill on the radio. But there was a comment, and maybe it didn't get transcribed, is that they'd love to have Chandler back, but that's a position. I think it was Cliff Kingsbury on Pat McAfee's show. And he alluded to the fact that, whether or not they brought back Chandler Jones, that's a position they probably need to get younger at. We're kind of signaling they're looking for more youth there. Maybe not necessarily young, but younger than 32, which brings us to, if Chandler Jones leaves, what do you do at that position? Because you have to decide, are you going to then let Marcus Golden be your number one, kind of like expecting him to be the number one pass rusher? Or two, do you try and replace Jones in terms of production? Which is the big question. And then there's some names out there, obviously. Harold, unfortunately, a name that I would have loved to see the Cardinals land would have been Harold Landry, but he just re-upped with the Titans. 5 years, $87.5 million. Very similar to the deal that Chandler Jones got 5 years ago. Cardinals fans remember Hassan Reddick. That's going to be that's we've talked about Hassan before. I would be all over that if it doesn't go too long, simply because of the physical limitations that once the quickness dips a little bit, I think his pass rushing ability then becomes greatly diminished.
Yeah, and this is a tough, again, when you're talking about different things, you're talking, edge rushers, you've got old guys, you've got young guys, but you've got two guys that are clear at the top, and that's Von Miller and Chandler Jones.
Yes. And they're old.
Yeah, and they're both. Vaughn's going to be 33 this year. Chandler's
just turned 32.
So they're old. You've got guys that are fantastic at other things that don't provide the same type of pass rush. I think Hassan is or don't offer, the play in the run game. So like Hassan Reddick is fantastic as a blitzing edge rushing type of guy, and
does you can peel him off and cover too,
but his strength isn't
he doesn't set the edge well.
But then you've got a guy like Jadeveon Clowney who has never really been a true dominant pass rusher, but has been a guy that is amazing against the run.
Amazing at the run. And is disruptive in the pass game, just for some reason just does not have the sack production.
Yeah, and you're looking at around the same amount of money for those two. So like, what are you going to pay for? Are you going to pay for sacks, or are you going to pay for a guy that is probably what we would consider a more complete player, but not quite the pass rusher in Clowney? So Clowney's projected to get around 12 to 13. Reddick's projected around 12 to 13 a year. Now, the way that they paid Harold Landry, that might reset that market, right? Because that was a hell of a lot of money for Harold Landry, man. You look at it, you got some interesting names. We know about Randy Gregory, probably just more of, like I talked about, like the pass rushing type of guy. But because of his off the field issues, he's been around since 2015. It's just he hasn't played that much. And so he's probably looking to cash in and get maybe, one big contract, maybe a $12 to $14 million a year contract over, 3 years. I don't know if anybody's going to give him like a 5-year deal because he's going to be 30 this year. But could you get him at, 3 for 40 type of thing? And two, again, baggage. So like, are you comfortable giving him 3 years and $40 million? Charles Harris is a guy that had kind of a breakout year this year. Could you get him on a similar deal to what Hassan Reddick signed last year with the Panthers, right? And get him on a 1-year deal for like $8 to $9 million, while he tries to double up on that, plays as a motivated guy, and then ends up going and getting, a bag the next year when the salary cap goes up even more. So, maybe he's a guy, because he's only going to be 28 this year. So, maybe it's a 1-year, $10 million deal, and then comes back and signs a 3-year, $50 million type of deal, $45 million type of deal. So those are the questions you have to ask.
Emanuel Agba is intriguing, except for
he's not a great pass rusher, but he's a really good edge defender. Like, he'd be like one step down from Clowney. Similar types in what their strengths are.
And he's gotten 9 sacks each of the last 2 years, so the sack production went up. However, and this, I remember this dating back to the draft. 3-4, like, he might not be as good playing in the Cardinal scheme because of the outside linebacker responsibilities that Vance Joseph sometimes has them doing.
Right, and let's be honest, I don't know if you can pair him up with Marcus Golden, because that's a very unathletic, now hardworking,
yes,
but it's a very unathletic group.
I know he has been disappointing. What about Dante Fowler?
Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with bringing a Fowler.
Especially when he thrived, it was in a Wade Phillips system.
Right, and he's still young-ish.
Yeah,
right?
He's 27. He'll be 28.
And in the same vein, and I'd have to really dig into this film, but just mentioning names. What about a guy like a Derrick Barnett that never reached his potential in Philly, albeit they've had a lot of issues there, right? Like, I just feel like this is a class where you should be able to find some help. And I think that's one of the things that this team needs more than anything else is some help. And that's what they're going to have to identify and address are guys like that, and being able to bring in, like you said, a Dante Fowler. I'm interested to see what Fowler would get paid, man. Like, I don't think
because he got when he signed with the Falcons,
it was just 1 year, $15 million,
and he underwhelmed. And so, literally, he's had one good year, and that was with the Rams in 2019. Because he had, in his second year, he had 8 sacks with Jacksonville, but then he had the 11.5 with the Rams in his first full season with them, but it was, let's be honest, it was the first time that he was playing as an outside backer. And if you remember him coming out of the draft, he doesn't have your traditional 4-3 end build. He's 6'3", 255.
No, not at all. What about a guy that's played, fairly well as a part-time guy, and maybe he gets, that juice and that boost in like a Jacob Martin from Houston?
That's not bad, and not that this would be your depth. I'm gonna bang on the Kyler Fackrell because he's a local kid.
Yeah.
But I think as a third option, instead of having your Dennis Gardick, you have a guy like Kyler Fackrell who's had major production before, good production before, but then becomes your third guy into the rotation that you kind of want to see.
Yeah, and there's some other names too that you could look at, like a Tack McKinley, who's never really, like you said, lived up to expectations. I think, but that's the thing, is I think there's a diverse group of pass rushers here that you can go find 2 that fit what you need, because they need at least 2. And then if you find out, if you end up with a chance to draft let's say like a Jermaine Johnson falls a little bit. I don't think Trayvon Walker will, but
I don't. Trayvon Walker would be shocking if he were available then. But yeah, Jermaine Johnson, I would be at least.
And then you can still pick them. And I know people are going to hate this, so don't kill the messenger. But then he doesn't have to play immediately.
Right. He could. Well, and that's the thing with an edge rusher. It's different than some of these other positions where you play at inside back, where they're every down players. Right. Is you can have them rotationally come in on certain packages and thrive.
Right. And I think that, that would make sense for this team. Obviously, ideally, but I don't think you're going to get a Jordan Davis after his workout.
That would be well, and I know you guys, and like you and Justin. I mean, he's a freak, but that size.
Yeah, and we actually talked about him because on our podcast last night, and this isn't draft, so I won't go too into it, but we talked about the fact that we've literally just never seen a team like this, or sorry, not a team, a player like this.
The size, speed, he's 341 pounds, running a 4.78, broad jumped over 10 feet. It's absurd.
Yeah, he's a true freak, and so that's the thing is when you look at it on the defensive line, and to your point, the edge positions, man, that's when those guys do a good job. It's in the combine, all of a sudden it changes everybody's perception, right? And it changes, and so now guys like Devontae Wyatt, Trayvon Walker, all those Georgia guys are now all of a sudden starting to go.
and you now realize the exact reason why Georgia was so freaking good this last year.
Oh, I know, right, man? That team is insane to see what they did. But yeah, I mean, so when you look at it from that perspective, you've got a lot of options, and then you can still go and double dip in the draft. So you can go get a guy like a Chuck Harris, a Dante Fowler, who's the other one we mentioned that has kind of underwhelmed, a Derrick Barnett on a 1-year deal, and draft somebody, or you could get a guy like a big time guy that maybe like a Jadeveon Clowney, and then still draft a pass rusher, and then you're able to be multiple, and that's something that you can think about a little bit with this class. Hell, you could, I mean, we talked about it, and I don't want to say we dismissed it, but you could go get an Emanuel Agba if you can, and then go double dip and grab a Jermaine Johnson, or like we said, probably not going to be there, but a Trayvon Walker in round 1, and then you're like, okay, I really like this grouping, as opposed to just being like, well, they drafted an edge already, so we don't need to worry about it. It's no, they need to worry about literally everything on the
Absolutely. And cornerback position is really intriguing because while there's one name that stands out above all else, being J.C. Jackson, there are a lot of really potentially solid additions you can make depending on how much you want to spend. What you see about Byron Murphy and Marco Wilson next year.
I was going to say we're not going to talk about adding another
inside linebacker.
Linebacker.
No, we're not going to talk about that. that is not a position of need. They've got too many of them. At cornerback. So the big names that are going to be available are Stephon Gilmore, J.C. Jackson, but I don't know if the Cardinals are going to be in play for those guys. It's a position.
I will say, kind of insider talk, inside baseball thing, and obviously their interest is a very loose term. So I want people to understand, but they would like to be able to pursue J.C. Jackson. The problem becomes his market value is between $18 and $21 million. And so let's say, and I get it, they can structure it where he only has an $8 million cap hit this year, and so it's not a big deal, but dude, that's a lot of money to push off. A lot.
Especially when I'm sure they anticipate Byron Murphy
being a guy they pay.
And he's a guy that they probably want to extend during this year. That said, there are some very capable, very capable cornerbacks. Let's kind of go through the list. And a lot of them are older. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that honestly, it's almost they need the experience more than they need the youth, especially if they count on Marco Wilson being a starter again, along with Byron Murphy. And what we've said is that we feel they need to bring in one definite starter and one quasi-starter type player. Whether if you bring back Robert Alford, which I'm all for, it comes down to then how much and are you counting on him starting? And he can start, and I'm okay with that. But there's look at some of the names on this list that are very capable players. You've got Joe Hayden, you've got Kyle Fuller, Chris Harris, who is known to Vance Joseph, Justin Verrett. The injuries are something you always worry about. Kevin King, Darius Williams played for the Rams. He's super intriguing to me. He's very versatile. I really, really like him. Charvarius Ward. You go down the list some. You can also add names like Eli Apple. He's still only 26 years old, former first-round pick. Hasn't been the lockdown, but has been and was very solid for Cincinnati this last year. There's some names on this list that you could be comfortable with there that aren't, Steven Nelson, who's the name that came up, Desmond King. There's a whole bunch of names that you could go, okay, and you'd find yourself in a pretty good spot, especially if you can get someone that will allow Byron Murphy to be primarily slot, where he thrived early in the season and then has played. Very interesting what happened with his play late in the season. You create competition for Marco, and there's a whole bunch, but like Darius Williams, having watched in the last couple of years with the Rams, I know he's going to end up probably getting paid more than the Cardinals can afford, but I would love to see Darius Williams.
Yeah, and you look at it, he's a guy that's probably going to get around 11 to 13 million a year, which I think is a reasonable price. What about a guy like Steven Nelson, that's played well for a number of teams? I know Charvarius Ward has been hot and cold. He's an interesting fit. He's, projected to be around, 9 to 11 a year. You've got, you mentioned a couple of guys in terms of the high end, obviously J.C. Jackson, Stephon Gilmore. But what about a guy like a Dante Jackson out of Carolina? Now, see, the problem with a lot of these guys, though, man, is I just don't know if they fit into what Vance wants to do. Here's what I'll say. I think if they are going to play man heavy, like we've seen, a guy like an Akilo Witherspoon, who's a big guy, right? Or I'm trying to look through all these names, see if anybody really tickles the fancy here.
I remember coming out of the draft that Anthony Everett would be intriguing with his athleticism. Didn't he come out of Alabama a few years ago? Really thrived this year for Baltimore as a starter.
Yeah, and his market value is not too bad, in that 12 million range. You look at it, that's the thing, though, man. That's what these guys get paid. So you've got to invest. I assume they're going to try to bring Robert Alford back again, which I think would be a smart choice. Because, again, you can count on him to be a solid depth guy if that's all you need. We see, like, you can't trust him to be a guy as in a every down guy, right? But
no, and that's one of the things they made sure is that Wilson was on the field every snap, so that Alford's snaps were as if he were the nickelback, as in traditionally the nickelback plays in the slot, but no,
right.
Yeah, but he played, the 50 to anywhere between the 40 to 60% range.
Would you pay a guy like that's projected to get 18 to 20 million a year in Carlton Davis? Would you pay him?
I mean, he's good.
He's very good. He's a good size dude at I think he's 6'1", 210. Productive, number one corner on a Super Bowl winning team.
And the type of that he'll fit the scheme because he played for Todd Bowles.
Right. And so that's just a lot of cake.
It really is. That's the one thing is that are you going to, what are you going to prioritize your limited cap space? Are you going to put that on the premium positions? Are you going to try and are you going to try now? You look at what they've gotten. So you've got Byron Murphy, you got Mark Wilson. They could always draft another cornerback, but you still need experience back there because they don't have. I mean, when Byron Murphy's your veteran.
Right, exactly. So I mean, they've got a lot of decisions to make in that sense. I think that this is a good free agency and draft class for their needs. I know that we've talked about, their main needs, obviously, like running back and wide receiver, tight end, and guard, and then talk about the edge and the corner positions. But, when you look at it, this class either is strong along the edge and corner position, like in free agency, and the guard position, like we talked about. You've got a lot of options along the defensive line in terms of veterans, but you may not have a ton of big name or good players in terms of the front defensive line.
Let's come back to that. So coming next to the Rise of Seahawks podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about those other spots we didn't like. Defensive line players we're not expecting them to do big impact things. We'll talk about those coming next on Rise of Seahawks. We're back on the Rise of Seahawks podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the whim. Other areas where they're going to add players, and they're probably all going to be lesser known guys, depth, fringe starter type things. Defensive line is one of those positions. You look at how they have their roster. We figure Jordan Phillips is probably going to be cut, whether it'll probably be a post June 1st so that they can spread that cap, that dead money over for years. But that leaves them. So you've got J.J. Watt and Zach Allen, whom they anticipate will have a big part of the defense. So you've got two guys that you're counting on. Rashard Lawrence, who I believe they expect to be their star. I can't understate this enough. You don't it's a very low key. They really like Rashard Lawrence.
Yeah.
They really like him, and so I believe they anticipate him as your main nose tackle. That said, I would expect a rotational veteran nose tackle being added in free agency.
Yeah, and you look at it, they're probably not going to be able to bring back a Calais Campbell, right? But there's some other names. What about a big man like Akeem Hicks?
Linval Joseph.
That's free agent Linval. An interesting name that I'm going to let Jess try and pronounce is the Fedikosti from the New York Jets. He is a prototype kind of run defending nose tackle, and I think that would be a guy that really kind of fits what they want to do, and you probably are going to get him for like a 3 to 15 to 20 type of deal. And I mean, we know they need help along the line. A guy like BJ Hill, I believe he was a guy. Where did he go? Yeah, he was an NC State guy. Played for the Giants.
I remember when he came out. I remember having discussions about him from the draft.
Yeah, and he's a guy that ended up playing in the Super Bowl this year with the Bengals. An interesting one to think about because he's more of a he showed some skills this year in San Fran is like a DJ Jones, right?
He's super, he is really intriguing. He really is.
And so, he's still youngish at 27, so he'll be 28 this year. But if you got him for 3 years, 20 million, again, weakening opponent, strengthening your team, a guy that fits what they need. We talked about it you mentioned Linval Joseph, but what about a younger guy, not quite the run stopper, so I don't want people to take it that way, but a guy like Sebastian Joseph Day, right? And he play again coming from the Rams, so you're weakening an opponent when you do something like that. He's a guy that I feel like could fit. One guy that really intrigues me because of his size is Tim Settle out of Washington, or the Commanders, or whatever they're called now. He's 6'3". They list him at 328. The problem is he hasn't been a great run defender. And so you wonder if that's, a thing that they wouldn't pursue in that case because they need it, and then the Buffalo Bills have a guy in Harrison Phillips, their big kind of nose tackle guy.
And then you could always, Corey Peters will probably remain an option as well.
Right. And so, I think you've got a lot of good options this year. And you've got a lot of you can go super high end, or you can bargain shop and find guys that fit. The two guys I would really focus on would be a DJ Jones, like I said, young, athletic, two-way player, as in a guy that you don't have to take off the field to rush the passer or in rushing situations, because he's shown that he can do it. And then the kid out of the New York Jets, the big man Fatukasi. Yeah, he man, when you talk about improving the run defense, obviously we'd love to grab a guy like Akeem Hicks, right? That would be great, or bring back a Calais Campbell. But those are older guys that, again, they fit for the 1 year, but we need to look at this as a 2 to 3 year thing now, where you're trying to build, and then you can replace those guys with draft picks. That needs to be kind of the key focus over the next year.
Yeah, well, and they also still got Leki Fotu, who's flashed some, but at the same time still has more to do. So, I don't want to spend a lot. They need a punter and a long snapper. Do you see them let's not be long snapper, whatever. They're going to bring a long snapper, whether it's Aaron Brewer or whoever. But do you think they go outside of Andy Lee and try to bring a known punter on, or do you think they try to go young?
Yeah, I think they'd like to bring on somebody younger, but at the same time, you have to be very careful with it, because you saw how much it screwed up.
Matt Prater.
Matt Prater, thank you. I was going to say Patricia, and I was like, that's not right. but like you've got some interesting names like Brian Anger punted really well for Dallas this year, and then the Corey Bohorkowitz kid from Green Bay wasn't bad this year. Those guys are interesting, but for the most part, I think you probably bring back Lee unless, and I know this is crazy talk, but like unless you draft like a kid, that San Diego State kid that's that phenom punter coming out and stuff like that. So
yeah, and with that, we will end this preview show of free agency, because by the time we do our next show, the negotiation window, so the soft opening or tampering period, the legal tampering period of free agency will have begun. So we'll only have rumors, and we will have some reports, but we won't have anything solid. So next week's show, we will shift back to the draft. We're going to try and get Justin Higdon back on to kind of talk about the combine, since we kind of had to delay it. But who stood out for the combine? We touched a little bit that. What did we learn from that week in Indy? So with that, that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening as always, and we'll be back again next week.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise Up, Red Sea, Be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.